The ivory keys were cold, but Kaito's fingertips were burning. Every afternoon, the same relentless rhythm echoed through the cramped music studio. To Kaito, the world had narrowed down to the 88 keys in front of him and the prestigious national competition that loomed only weeks away. He didn't just want to play, he wanted to dominate, to prove that his technique was flawless. His eyes rarely strayed from the sheet music, chasing a perfection that seemed just a few measures out of reach. In the far corner of the room, sitting on a worn wooden stool, was Hana. She had been there since they were children, a constant, quiet fixture in the background of his life. While Kaito chased glory, Hana lived in the silence between his notes. She was the one who made sure his tea was always at the perfect temperature. She was the one who gathered the scattered sheets of music he tossed aside in frustration, organizing them with a tenderness he never noticed. To Kaito, Hana was like the air in the room, essential, yet entirely invisible. He would often talk for hours, his voice rising with the intensity of his dreams. He spoke of the grand concert halls and the thunderous applause. He talked at her, never to her. He never asked how her day had been or why her eyes seemed a little heavier. Hana would simply nod, offering a small, fragile smile, content to be the vessel for his ego. She cleaned the dust from the pedals and swept the floor while he rested. Yet he treated her more like a piece of furniture than his closest friend. The arrival of a new rival only deepened Kaito's self-absorption. This newcomer was charismatic, possessing a natural fluidity that made Kaito's rigid perfectionism look strained. The pressure began to mount, turning Kaito's passion into a jagged defensive weapon. When the rival's performance at a local showcase was met with a standing ovation, Kaito returned to his studio in a dark, frantic mood. Hana tried to offer him a gentle word of comfort, placing a hand near his shoulder, but he brushed her off with a sharp, impatient gesture. He was too busy battling his own insecurities to notice the way her hand trembled or how her skin had taken on a translucent, sickly pallor. A persistent cough began to punctuate the silence of his breaks. It was a dry, hacking sound that she tried to stifle behind her sleeve, but Kaito only frowned, complaining that the noise was distracting him. "It's just a cold, Hana. Drink some water and stay quiet," he had snapped one evening without looking up. She had simply apologized, her voice a mere whisper, and moved further into the shadows. He didn't see the way she clutched her chest or the exhaustion that seemed to pull at her every movement. The night of the preliminary round was a blur of adrenaline. Kaito played with a desperate ferocity that earned him a spot in the next stage. As the judges announced his name, his heart soared. His friends swarmed him, dragging him out into the city lights to celebrate. In the excitement, he completely forgot about the girl who had spent hours waiting in the wings with his coat and a handmade Lucky Charm. Outside, a cold autumn rain began to fall. As Kaito laughed and toasted with his peers under the neon glow of a bar, Hana stood alone by the stage door, her sweater soaking through. She watched him walk away, surrounded by people who only knew his talent. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. As she turned to walk home, the Lucky Charm slipped from her numb fingers. She gasped, a jagged cough racking her small frame as she bent down to the ground, but the strength left her legs. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed onto the concrete, the small charm just inches from her reaching hand. The sun rose the next morning, casting long shadows across the music studio, but for the first time in years, the room felt hollow. Kaito sat at his piano, his fingertips hovering over the keys, but they felt heavy and unresponsive. He expected the familiar sound of the kettle or the soft rustle of Hana organizing his sketches. Instead, there was only the oppressive silence of an empty house. The air was stale, devoid of the scent of jasmine she carried. He reached for his coffee, finding the mug cold and empty. When he tried to find his notebook, it wasn't in its usual spot. It took 20 minutes of searching through papers to realize that his entire world had been held together by a ghost. His talent was a fragile thing that relied on the invisible structure she had built. Without her, even sitting on the piano bench felt unbalanced. A call from the hospital shattered his frustration. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly green hue on the linoleum floor as he rushed down the hall. Seeing Hana in the sterile ward was like seeing a bird with clipped wings. She looked smaller, her skin the color of the white sheets. Yet her first instinct was to hide her fragility. She forced a smile and told him it was just exhaustion from the rain. "I'm just tired, Kaito," she whispered over the hum of the monitors. "The finals are in 3 days. You shouldn't be here. You need to be at the piano." He wanted to ask more questions, but her insistence was unwavering. She played the role of the devoted supporter until the end, shielding him from her agony so he wouldn't lose his focus. Back at his studio, the silence was no longer empty. It was loud with memories. He closed his eyes and saw a younger version of them. He remembered the day he almost gave up, a 10-year-old boy crying over a difficult sonata, and how Hana had sat beside him, pressing a single key and telling him it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She was the one who had written that silly, hopeful melody with him when they were 12. A song they joked would be played at the world's greatest venues one day. Every accomplishment he had ever claimed as his own was stained with her quiet, persistent encouragement. Seeking the manuscript of their childhood song, Kaito entered Hana's house. In her small study, he found a decorative wooden box containing more than just music. There was a stack of unsent letters addressed to him, spanning the last year. Beside them lay medical records revealing a terminal diagnosis from 12 months ago. She had been dying while he complained about her cough. She had been fighting for breath while he obsessed over the tempo of a nocturne. The letters were filled with words she never said, how proud she was, how she wished for more time, and how she never wanted her shadow to dim his light. The weight of the revelation crushed his spirit. As the day of the national finals arrived, Kaito was a ghost of himself. He stood in the wings of the grand concert hall, the prestigious stage beckoning him with cold, professional lights. His heart was a battlefield of guilt and ambition. Hana had insisted he go, begging him to play the song they had written together, claiming it would give her strength just to know he was out there. He walked onto the stage, the bright spotlights blinding him. The applause was a distant roar, like waves hitting a shore miles away. As he sat at the grand piano and adjusted the bench, his eyes instinctively drifted to the front row. There, amidst the sea of critics and strangers, was the single seat he had reserved for her. It was empty. The velvet cushions sat untouched, a terrifying void that screamed louder than any music he had ever played. Kaito stared at the empty seat, the velvet red mocking his previous blindness. His fingers rested on the keys, but the technical masterpiece he had practiced for months vanished. He began to play. It wasn't the rigid, perfect composition the judges expected. Instead, he pulled out the melody they had written together as children. The notes were apologies and unspoken words. The audience held its breath. The rival watched from the wings, realizing he was witnessing something beyond mere skill. Kaito wasn't playing for a trophy anymore. He was playing for the girl who had spent her life in his shadow, the one who had seen his failures and loved him anyway. As the song reached its crescendo, the stage lights softened, blurring the edges of the hall. In his mind, Kaito saw her. Hana wasn't in the front row, she was sitting on the bench beside him. He could almost feel the phantom warmth of her shoulder. He played with a ferocity that shook the room, every chord a plea for her to stay. The judges sat in silence, their pens abandoned. The music wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It bled with the realization that he had ignored the most beautiful part of his life until the very moment it was finally slipping away. The final note hung in the air with a haunting tension. Before the applause could begin, Kaito stood. He didn't bow. He sprinted off the stage, his jacket flapping behind him. He burst into the night air, ignoring the organizers. He ignored the rain that began to fall, mirroring the night he had left her alone, his tuxedo soaked through just as her sweater had been. He ran until his lungs burned, the city lights a smear. Every heartbeat drummed her name. He arrived at the hospital, breath coming in ragged gasps. He reached her ward, his hand trembling as he pushed open the heavy door. The room was quiet. The machines were silent. The bed was perfectly made, the white sheets smooth and devoid of the fragile girl. The window let in a draft that smelled of jasmine. The empty pillow still held a faint indentation, a ghostly reminder of the head that had rested there, dreaming of his success while her own life flickered out. There was no one there to tell him she was sleeping. The hollowness was absolute. Kaito collapsed into the chair, the silence crushing him. He had won the competition in his heart, but he had lost the only person who ever truly heard his music. A nurse entered, her expression one of weary compassion. She handed him a pale blue envelope, whispering that Hana had wanted him to have it before she retreated into the hall. Kaito opened the letter with shaking hands. It was titled, "To my favorite pianist." In her delicate script, Hana wrote that she had no regrets. She had found her purpose in his passion and was happy to have witnessed his journey. She told him her love didn't need a spotlight to be real, and that whenever he played, she would be listening from the silence between the notes. Forever his most devoted fan. Years passed. Kaito was no longer the arrogant boy obsessed with trophies. He was a world-renowned musician, known for the profound emotional depth of his performances. He remained humble, performing for free in city parks. On an autumn afternoon, he set up a piano where he and Hana had played as kids. A crowd gathered, but Kaito played with his eyes closed. Lost in their shared song, he wasn't playing for fame. He was playing for the memory of the girl who had loved him more than she loved herself, keeping her spirit alive through every harmony. As the notes drifted away, Kaito opened his eyes. He looked toward the back of the crowd, where a young girl stood. She was around 7, with dark, gentle eyes that felt impossibly familiar. In her small hand, she clutched a weathered Lucky Charm, the one Hana had dropped so long ago. The girl smiled at him, a serene expression that transcended her age, before walking into the golden sunset. Kaito felt an overwhelming peace. He realized that while Hana was gone, her devotion had become a permanent part of the world's song, an eternal connection that would never fade. She was still there, and he finally noticed her.